There once was a man who fled from a hospital after being deemed fit to return to society, able to manage his ailments, the kind that once left him unable to interact with the world around him. He returned to it with a proclamation that beauty will save the world. That man is Prince Nikolaev Mishkin, and that man was labeled by everyone around him as an idiot. Hence, why he was the main character of Dostoevsky's The Idiot. Throughout the book, he experiences many follies in Russian high society, jumping through many hoops along the way, all while caught in the pursuit of beauty, manifesting in his romantic crusade for the love of a woman named Natasha. That strange ideal clouds his mind for most of the book, even as she gets further in the horizon. Yet, his pursuits carry on, out of an unwavering devotion to this self-identified truth, even as many of his friends and allies point out the futility of such action. You may be asking, why in this video talking about a manga am I bringing up Russian literature? Am I just a snob and want to flex what I've read? Or to show that I'm like some galaxy brain intellect that allowed me to struggle through a book that is as long-winded, complicated, and strangely invigorating as The Idiot? Okay, it is that. I'm also just a huge snob, too. But in reading 20th Century Boys for the first time, it sparked many parallels between Prince Mishkin's efforts in the book and his idealism to what we see happen throughout the series, taking on the world with a naive optimism that leads, ultimately, to his downfall. A conflict we see repeatedly throughout 20th Century Boys, a manga series that has made me reflect on my own history with the medium, the dreams I had in my childhood, and the reckoning they have in adulthood. So join me while I discuss all this series has to offer, and the large amount of self-reflection it has invoked in me. I've been reading manga for a long time, getting into things like Hunter x Hunter from my local library, speed reading Naruto's conclusion when the anime had way too much fucking filler, and for some reason thinking that Boruto would be a good idea to read, when it only took a few chapters to realize how much of a shit show it turned out to be. I mean, just look at that shit. I like shonen anime, I like shonen manga, and this unique form takes those stories into a different kind of expression outside of the animated form. Manga allows me to take these stories in at my own pace and experience the unique components that make it feel so different and make me kind of sit with each individual panel. But for a large part of my teen years, I had neglected the comic form. That was until the summer of 2020, when I was locked down, just like everyone else, and couldn't go anywhere, and my first year of college went kaput. So, with the extensive free time I had, I just started randomly reading everything I could get my hands on, a lot of which fueled the angst I had at the time during that isolated period. But most importantly for this video was a manga called Goodnight Punpun, in which, despite of never wanting to read it again, is actually one of my favorite series. This might have started with me stumbling into Hiding in Public's analysis of this Inio Asano masterpiece. The video itself points out many of the character flaws and Punpun's self-destructive nature. He would always push people away and end up in a similar place to his mother. For me, the biggest takeaway has a lot to do with the nature of childhood dreams. How many of the things you want to do as a kid, you won't be able to. The idea it presents is that when you grow up, the dreams you had then were delusions. That all the stars you wished to explore were actually Chinese satellites. Punpun instilled a truth into my young mind. The truth being that when you grow up, your life will be nothing like what you imagined it to be. And if you try to attach yourself to those aspirations, the chasm between reality and dreams will be the distance from you and life's joy. At least that's how I took it at the time. I still have not read it since, and really, I don't think I can or want to. I remember trying to read it later in that same year, and finding myself completely dejected by the time I got to the badminton match. Maybe I'll read it again someday, but now, as a grown adult out of college, I would rather not be perpetually sad for 13 volumes of manga. I'm at a better spot now, so why would I do that to myself? However, reflecting on this manga and my history with manga, it does beg the question, what happens when your childhood fantasies become true, even when you don't want them to? What happens when those fantastic visions you and your friends conjured up to impress one another mutate into reality? What happens when the shows you watch allow you to conjure up a vision of heroes and villains, then to have that vision enter the complexities of the real world? A world in which endless complexities already create a spider web of issues brought on by endless change that we see in our day-to-day lives, only to have more and more complexities come your way in a way that is out of your control and makes you feel helpless. That strange dread is what's discussed in Naoki Urasawa's 20th Century Boys. 20th Century Boys is a manga series that has not left my conscience since I first read it, and even more so after I decided to reread it and write this video. It is an expansive cast of characters, the depth of which offers a great level of insight into their inner workings and their daily lives. This offers a glimpse into the people who fall ill to corruption, cults, and other forms of deception. Every moment is packed with suspense and intrigue, and keeps you going throughout its 22-volume run. Not to mention, it has some funny gags that add moments of brevity here and there. The structure it has is subversive, with how it denies a climax pretty early on that pushes the stakes even higher. So everything that we see early on still has a huge impact way later into the series. Even putting that into 21st Century Boys. The direction Urasawa takes the world in at the turn of the century is an interesting one. The version of Japan and the world at large, which is depicted, shows one from Friend's influence, and Friend being the main antagonist of the series who runs this cult. And throughout the story, we see that cult of personality form and get larger and larger. With that, we see a world that is quite bleak. The setting feels much like a dystopia, but has a vivid realism, cataclysmic events that lead to it, and lead to Friend taking over. It maintains a good, keen awareness that these characters exist outside of the story, and actually have lives, yet the details that come out from their day-to-day life show you how large of a shadow Friend casts over this whole entire series. The characters themselves are pretty interesting and nuanced, full of complexities that come with life and the mistakes that pile up with time. They're incredibly well written, and in the 200 plus chapters of the manga, you see them change and come to terms with many of the experiences of their life. Their past, their dreams and failures, and how that affects the lives of others around them, intentional or not. The artwork is also just incredible. Each character feels distinct. There is a dramatic weight in each facial expression, and every use of paneling and use of scene layout builds to moments of grand reveals and awe that I still think about as I'm recording this video. It's easy to see why this is loved by so many a manga reader. After having read it a handful of times now, I can confidently say that it ranks among my favorites. So if you haven't read it yet, fucking read it. However, if you are here for a dissection of the story and many of the characters, you will see it here. From this point forward in the video, it's gonna be all spoilers. So if you want to read it, I'd suggest you just stop now and leave a like and a subscribe and a hype or something, just to help my video get better placement of the algorithm, and go fucking read it. I'll try my best to go through the plot as best I can, but my focus here is on the characters. There's just so much detail to go into with the plot that I couldn't possibly condense it down into one video without sending this video's length into a full feature film. I feel like I'm gonna leave out a lot of details, so let me know if I miss anything in the comments. But most importantly, it would also save my computer from trying to render something like that. So, yeah. Anyways, enjoy the rest of the video. To start, I think we should talk about Kenji, our main character and driving catalyst throughout the story. At the start of the manga, he is at a point where he is burnt out on life. Kenji is someone who was once filled with ambitions, had them cut short because he needed to take care of his sister's child, Kanna, and needed to run the family's liquor store in his sister's absence. He embraced the responsibilities of life so fully that he became complacent in the stagnant air they exude. The callous hands from his rock days have gone soft. In the opening chapters, we see him yearn for that rock band past, but with some understanding of the burden he must take on. Much like his sister did for him when they were younger. When Kenji went off to be rocking in the free world, he is now returning the favor to her as she just vanishes without a trace, forcing himself into a position in which he is resigned on all fronts to bear down against the realities of adulthood, without moving on to the good things that adulthood entails, like marriage, family, and a fulfilling job. The typical things you expect as an adult. All the things that Kenji sees his friends move into at the beginning of the story. Last of which was his friend Karonyan, whose wedding provides Kenji with more introspection, provoking him to ask stuff like, I wonder if we are the adults now that we dreamed of being back then, or if our childhood selves would laugh if they saw us now. But Kenji's fine with this. At least he says he is. That is, until he's confronted, quite literally, with a reckoning of the past with the first appearance of Friend. Friend enters the picture around the time that Kenji's childhood friend, Donkey, ends up taking his own life. The circumstances of this suicide become increasingly more suspicious with the details that accumulate around it and the proximity to the friend group that Donkey had, a mysterious organization that organizes large seminars whose central figure is only known as Friend and bestows wisdom on the masses. Much of the rhetoric used during these meetings bears a striking resemblance to the things that Kenji and his friends conjured up as kids, especially the eponymous symbol that Friend wears as a mask, which distinguishes everyone in the group. The one that Donkey brings to Kenji in his last letter, asking him, do you remember the symbol? Further and further into the rabbit hole surrounding the Friend group, he comes to realize that. He sees the things they do and the things that are happening around the world, and after a chance encounter with an ill-fated survivor of the Friend group, he finds out that many of the events are of his design. The things that he and his friends conjured up as a supervillain plan to plot the destruction of the world that they named in their childish naivety the Book of Prophecies became truths in the eyes of the Friend group. It became their gospel, acting as if to bring them into reality, all while deeming Kenji as a prophet for making them. Kenji sees this all firsthand as he storms into one of their meetings. After storming out of it, he's left upset and in existential confusion. This event stirs in Kenji a great wind of change, a vortex that would ultimately shape his resistance. Donning the guitar once more to thwart Friend and the Friend group and their proclaimed doomsday, in an attempt to capture that feeling he had when he first picked up the guitar as a kid, brimming with confidence, he proclaimed, there, machine gun in hand, stood an invincible man, all the while building up a group to thwart the day that would be that New Year's battle. Kenji tried to transform his childhood dreams of rock worship into something else. When his band fell apart, he was left in its wake, lamenting what could have been. However, that passion for rock music was the thing that reignited the change he needed to rise to the occasion against the Friend group, gathering his own allies to take a stand against what was about to happen. Partnering with the homeless camp nearby, led by a man named God, or that the homeless call God, who speaks in bowling metaphors. That's besides the point. Either way, Kenji was prepared for this challenge, and was not afraid to lose his life. The same way he took on those responsibilities, he donned the heroics that felt like they were always his calling. In many of the flashbacks, we see this. He stood up to bullies, he fought imaginary battles with strong convictions and seeming invincibility, and showed the world his own style of rock bravado by blasting the T-Rex song 20th Century Boys. He was born for this. However, the others in his group did not have the luxury of leaving their past lives like that. Many abandoned families, jobs, and future prospects to be by his side. Yet there is one that I find most interesting among this band of misfits that risk it all to fight friend. That is Kenji's friend, Otcho. Otcho is another prime example of what I've been talking about so far. That expansive chasm between childhood and adulthood. However, unlike Kenji, Otcho's story is a bit more complicated and tragic. See, when he grew up, he became successful in the business world. He got married and had a kid. By most metrics, Otcho had become a successful person. Yet in his success, he made room for no one else in his life. Caught in the pursuit of material things, he hollowed out the happiness he could have had, which caused him to be distant from his family, a typical story by most measures, having a father overwork himself and just generally being absent. That is, until it turned tragic. Tragedy occurred when Otcho's son mistook a stranger for Otcho, leading him to get hit by a car, costing his son his life and Otcho the comfortable reality he had built. That comfort that was in reality nothing. At least Otcho treated these niceties like they were nothing. And yet he suffered a terrible loss while working towards the standard dream of suburban life. In his suffering, he came to realize his fatal error. It's not that he didn't care, it's that he didn't look behind him. He climbed and and he didn't look at what he was building to or where he was going, making the fall he had in the wake of this tragedy all the more devastating. Despite achieving many of these things, he ended up in a very similar position to Kenji. Lost in comfort, in need of a new reality. Yes, he had success, but all he could do was succeed in one arena of life. By the world at large, you could say that's a perfect life, I guess. Yet, the tragedy proves how hollow that perfection is. Like Kenji, he strives to find satisfaction or some form of happiness, and that takes the form of him helping tourists in Thailand who get caught in tourist traps, putting his life on the line to help others, fighting waves of gangsters to free those tourists from a seedy world of crime. Destiny calls, however, or someone masquerading as Destiny calls. Even from Thailand, thousands of miles away from his home country, the pull of friend is something he knows he must deal with, forcing him to take up arms with Kenji, knowing that this is his true calling. All that leads up to is Bloody New Year's Eve, an event so catastrophic that the manga skips 14 years after it happened. Yes, actually, during the climax of this big fight between Kenji and friend, Naoki Urasawa pulls the biggest psych in anime history and skips the big battle as a dramatic climax, re-establishing Japan under friend's political influence and entirely changing the setting 6 volumes in. You wanna know what? It actually fucking worked. The fucking madman. This misdirection builds up the changes in the world. We see those changes as we see the little details from these New Year's Eve, and we can see their influence from that one night. As we learn more and more about this new world that spawned from that day, we see the details of what went down on New Year's, spoon-fed throughout the second part. Changing course like this has to be one of my favorite choices in this story, and it's what the kids call absolute cinema, because it also displays why those events mattered. It makes them feel important, and you can see them and their effects side by side. This also introduces us to the teenage version of Kanna, a rowdy teenager hell-bent on carrying the torch that her uncle Kenji dropped when he vanished on that cruel, bloody New Year's Eve. She's among many other characters that are introduced in the second part of the manga, including the older versions of most of the main characters. Not only them, we also get to meet a young detective whose grandfather almost cracked the case years ago. Priests who used to be gangsters, a random high school girl who gets swept up into all this and taken away into some brainwashing camp, and the Pope. Yeah. Did I also mention that girl's good at bowling? There's just a lot that happens with these characters, and there's a lot of characters. I'm just rattling them off here because I want to emphasize how big this conspiracy becomes, and how many people in turn try to stop it. All of these characters eventually center on Kanna. Kanna serves as the only hope in countering Friend's conspiracy, which in the second part is Friend trying to set up the assassination of the Pope, a move that will cement him as a figurehead on a world scale, manipulating the masses so they eat out of the palm of his hand. What is important here is how Kanna gets into this position, how she has changed, and who she is taking after. Pretty obvious to say that it is Kenji as an influence, but at some points, she's very reminiscent of Friend, with her ability to influence people, gathering them together for revolutionary action. She does it in a way very similar to Friend throughout the series, through showy displays of will, courage, and luck. This is obvious considering Kanna is Friend's daughter, after all. She is going to obviously take after him in some ways. However, her intentions steer in a different, less self-important direction, which makes it more closely aligned with Kenji and his unwavering determination. And whenever she gets lost, she plays his songs and attempts to do what he would do in her shoes. So she definitely takes after both of these characters and kind of serve as a very conflicting influence in her. At this point in the story, she sees Kenji less like a parental figure and more like an idol. From our very first scene, we can see that, blasting Kenji's song repeatedly, over and over. Kanna intends to walk the same path that Kenji walked. However, the circumstances are different, and she's hoping that the outcomes will be too. Kenji faced the Book of Prophecies, something he had made up with his friends while they were young, where they imagined a doomsday scenario of their own creation, including some insanely improbable things, but with Friend's obsession, he brought them to reality, changing childish play into a real-world threat. So he at least had some idea of what was going to happen, and so he could try to stop it. However, the book runs dry after the events of Bloody New Year's Eve. Pages after that were torn out. That's why Friend continues them in the new Book of Prophecies, something that most of the cast is unable to handle, an entirely different foreign threat to everyone. And even when Kanna conjures up the courage to unite gangs in the midst of warfare to challenge that authority in a way for bettering the future, she's unable to. The new prophecies still unfold, even with some hiccups along the way. Some pretty big hiccups, I might add. Like Friend dying. And yet, all of these prophecies still happen in a way. And I emphasize in a way to show how loose these ideals are, so that they can be molded into truths that become reality. The savior of justice was assassinated in Shinjuku. The Pope falls in the east, and the Holy Mother descends. All of these things propel Friend onto the world stage, and all of them prove Book of Prophecies right. With their vague terminology, they all get proven right. All things that Kanna is helpless in stopping. She did everything that Kenji did. But what went wrong? She had the same spirit, the same people. Hell, she had more people than Kenji. So where did she go wrong? She did everything right, but wrong things continued to happen. Where did it all go wrong? I think the answer to this can be found not in Kanna, but in a side character whose brief presence in the second part paints a large picture of the issues at play here. Sadikiyo. While not originally part of Kenji's friend group, he did share the same class back in elementary school, even if Kenji didn't know it. Throughout his elementary school days, he hid behind a mask, hiding his identity behind it and becoming absorbed in fantasy. A fantasy in which he attempts to communicate with aliens, hoping that they will come down and save him by starting a friendship. This young version of Sadikiyo really reminds me of the Radiohead song Subterranean Homesick Alien. The song describes a man who is so desperate for connection and meeting that he hopes to commune with aliens, so much so that he feels alienated. Alienated? See what I did there? He's really an interesting side character, and he even allowed the quirked up sad white boy in me to come out and mention Radiohead in this video. They really get my fajitas sizzling. Anyways, that is the fantasy he had as a young boy, hoping to make his elementary school days better. That is until Friend finds him and decides to involve him in his conspiracy to bring the Book of Prophecies to fruition. He takes advantage of his desperation for connection and makes Sadikiyo become another cog in Friend's machine. Try as he may, Friend claims his life by spreading wild rumors, faking Sadikiyo's death to his former classmates, severing any potential connection he may have, making sure he cannot live his life. All that is left of Sadikiyo is fantasy and nostalgia of his youth. It ends up consuming his identity to the point that he's left in his adulthood to be the manager of the Friend Museum, a recreation of Friend's childhood home. The first time we see him in the second part is when we see him ranting about Gundams or some older iteration of mecha. There are pages upon pages of his unhinged ranting about this subject, like he was some unhinged Redditor who saw a misplaced semicolon in your post and is going to correct you and make you feel bad about it. This isn't a personal experience. I promise. Delirious as it may be, this version of Sadikiyo we meet in 2014 brings to light the reality our main characters and antagonists are dealing with. They are dealing with a conflict between embracing nostalgia and searching for liberation through it. However, in this case, it looks like he is only using it as comfort. But that can be said about all of these characters, that they don't substantially grow from this way of looking at the past. All the characters find courage in it, but they don't change anything in a meaningful way from it. Both good and bad. Both suffer from this affliction. Sadikiyo makes that apparent, seeing as he ends up kind of in the middle, questioning whether he is doing good or bad with his life, catching himself in the middle of this conflict, unable to discern whether the choices he has made align with where he himself wants to be. Sadikiyo realizes that. Even as he tries to set things right, he can't. He tried to help Friend, but that made things worse, only boxing him in further, and he began to feel overwhelmed by the sheer intensity of the situation he found himself in, trying to help one person, trying to do good for the world. As he says himself, when Friend killed him off, he got treated as though he didn't exist. Thus, his only refuge was his past and his fantasy that he held on to so dearly. That is, until he was acknowledged. He found solace after all these years of obscurity in the recognition he got from his teacher. The teacher didn't impose any idea of who that person he was looking at was. Sadikiyo was just Sadikiyo. He wasn't the objects that he enshrined in Friend's name at the Friend Museum. He wasn't the kid with the alien mask. He was himself, through and through. The identity he carved out for himself at that point, going forward, was to do good. Not just good for himself, but good for the world. What happens then if the opposite is true? When you lose your identity and become a caricature of someone's idea of you? Well, that's when you get Friend. From the very beginning, Friend's identity has been defined in terms of Kenji, in the book that Kenji made. His very first words in the manga were Friend comparing himself to the astronaut Michael Collins, who landed on the moon with Armstrong and Aldrin, but never stepped out, choosing not to be among the first humans to walk on the moon. That is a perfect summation of Friend's character from his own perspective. A man who lives in the shadow of glory, yet never actually attains it for himself. A man without individuality who seeks out identity through what others have created. This feels painfully true when we peer into the early years of Fubeki, since he has no true version of himself. At least not anymore. Like Sadikiyo, he experienced death early on in his life. Although he really died later in his life, the death he experienced in his adolescence is a far more meaningful one to his identity, one that he can never recover from. This death can be found through what the manga likes to call the lie of 1970 and the lie of 1971, two definitive moments that signify when Fubeki starts to become the version that we see in 1999 and 2014, the man we know as Friend. The first being related to an incident at the haunted house, where Friend lied to everyone in the class about going to the expo in Tokyo over summer vacation just to impress Kenji and his group of friends, only to do nothing but set up a lame prank in a haunted mansion. Even after he is dragged to said haunted mansion and is exposed for his lame fraud, no one really cares. You can see from the reactions of all of Kenji and his friends that this is just blatantly true. I know this sounds pretty insignificant. With this story and this manga, the small events of his childhood affect the world on a large scale, where things said and done at 10 years old had an impact on the world, whether it is realized by the person who made those decisions or not. Those things that felt huge to Fubeki at the time are brought back into adulthood with the same magnitude that they had in his younger years. It's a core idea of the series, really, that the childish things you felt as a kid have some impact as an adult, whether you admit it or not. 20th Century Boys just uses that conflict as the central pillar for a heightened thriller. It becomes apparent from the flashbacks. In 1970, he begins to start losing his identity. From his attempt to impress Kenji at the haunted house, he is consumed by the desire for validation for the rest of his life. With that lie, he reaches the point where Fubeki starts to feel invisible, that he has no identity, and he starts lashing out at the people around him like he did with Sadikiyo when he left his school, and he forces Sadikiyo to go through the same thing. However, the change that he starts to experience in 1970 is cemented in the lie of 1971, where Fubeki tries to recreate the prophecy he wrote in the new Book of Prophecies. It is stated, he will die and come back to life. This is done through Fubeki hanging himself on the last day of summer, with his conspirators by his side, only to be interrupted by Donkey, who we see in a very similar state to how he was presented in 1999, standing for a fleeting sense of goodness in the face of bewitching evil. In the face of this ritual of rebirth, Donkey states, when people die, they can never come back to life. Fubeki ignores this outright and sends him fleeing to arrogantly try something insane. He then begins his transformation into Friend. At least it seems that way. Fubeki's attempt to shed his identity starts off shaky, with his first attempt to use ESP on television, trying to make a name for himself that way, and it not going his way, and his powers just not working at all. But through time, he came to inspire awe in others, making them believe in his wonder-inducing powers of Friend, that Fubeki could only perfect with confidence. Confidence and a belief in the Book of Prophecies. Not only that, but the belief in Friend as his true identity and how that relates to what Kenji had written. The belief that Fubeki is dead and that Friend took his place. An impossible, irrefutably false idea which he chooses to take on. With this very powerful belief, he used it to make others believe in Friend. Not himself, but Friend. Friend lives through those prophecies, and the cult he formed around them as his only proof of Friend being real and Fubeki being dead, even though he is, in fact, still Fubeki. Until he is not. Even when the original Friend dies, the image of Friend carries on, adopted by someone new. Someone who is just as familiar with all the prophecies and the childhood memories take his place just under everyone's nose. So why is that? It's belief. It's the beliefs that Fubeki gave his followers as Friend, which the new Friend was able to sustain and make his own after resurrecting and taking a bullet for the Pope. A selfless-looking act with incredibly selfish intentions. With it, he proves that he is Friend, even though he is not Fubeki. Since Friend could perform such miracles, what's more miraculous than saving the Pope and saving the world from destruction a second time? Belief is a powerful thing. It allows for transformations to take shape in reality, even when they wouldn't be realistic otherwise. Above the psychic powers Friend has, this is his most powerful tool, his ability to get others to believe in him. It is unparalleled. It allows him to bend reality to his will and ensure that every prophecy written in those 2 books comes true in some way. His unwavering will becomes infectious, and it is the shaping force that allows these things to be brought into reality. Troublesome thing is, these prophecies aren't done out of some notion he arrived at himself, at least not originally. Kenji is the one who came up with all this. So Fubeki fulfilling these prophecies has made them a form of validation towards Kenji. And really, he isn't doing it out of some sort of belief that he holds himself. It's just a sign of how their relationship has not changed, even from the very early days, where Friend would always try to impress Kenji and his friends. And yet, continuing that on into his adulthood, he adopts these mannerisms when speaking to Kenji directly, asking Kenji to play with him and doing all these childish things to toy with Kenji. He's just doing it to impress them. In a way, he hasn't changed at all. He's still trying to impress Kenji, and he's doing all of these things in the service of trying to find his identity through the things someone else has put upon him. Yet it's difficult to understand why he does that. No one forced him into that position. No one warped his perspective that much. No one made him be Friend. He wanted it. He wanted to be seen, and this was the way he chose. He wanted others to believe in the world in those pages and give them life. Yet the life he believed in wasn't his. The life he lived was a lie. He only did what he thought Kenji wanted to see. He wanted to be Collins for Kenji's Armstrong. In a roundabout way, he is. But in doing so, he's essentially taken a backseat to living his own life, in the same way that Kenji has, by living for what other people want you to be. Again, nobody wants him to be that. He just felt like it was the only calling he had. I think it's interesting that we see these characters with the same sort of problem, taken to very different extremes. Similarities among these characters center on their falling at the mercy of life's changes, being besieged by the standards that come with those changes. Otcho, with his obsession for business, leading to the neglect of his family life, also leading to him trying to live with some vague sense of heroics that does nothing in the long run. Kanna, who is obsessed with the past and past culture. For her, she is someone who is obsessed with beating Friend, letting those 2 traits consume her entire personality, making Kanna lose any sense of power she had in the world, eventually making her feel helpless in the 3rd part, where we catch her about to perform a suicide mission against Friend. Friend, who I've just spent the last few minutes talking about, and his ever-expanding influence over the world. A world that inevitably becomes his. Yet, who is that person? What does that even mean for Friend? For Fubeki? Lastly, there is Kenji, a man whom all these characters look up to in some way, shape, or form. He tried to fulfill a dream, only for life to come crashing down on him over and over again. He made human mistakes, like anyone would. Even when opportunities knocked on his door, he made stupid decisions that we all could have made. Kenji abandoned it all for the sake of responsibility. All these guys felt the weight of the real world, and they all buckled in different ways. Only one of them was unwavering in their pursuits. That person was Friend, a person who believed in something so naive and cruel as world domination and destruction that he tried to enact it himself, when he didn't even know himself. He didn't know what that was. But what if you had a strong will in a force for good, a force you actually believed in and gained courage in the pursuit of? Well, that's when you get... Prince Mishkin is a strange man. He spends the majority of the idiot swooning over a woman who is mad and realistically will never love him back. Natasha can't find it in herself to love Mishkin back, feeling that it is undeserving of her. So instead, she teases everyone who tries to court her, throwing money to the wind and sometimes to the fire, lashing out at people, and cruelest of all, accepting the love of someone who would ultimately kill her. In this destruction, Mishkin finds that beauty personified is lost, meaning that the notion of beauty saving the world is dead in his eyes, because he himself could not save beauty. With that failure, he returns to the catatonic state he was in before his journey through Russian aristocracy began, mute and unable to conjure any action, let alone one in the name of beauty. However, this video isn't about him or the idiot. No, this is just a video made by an idiot. A pretentious one at that. No matter how many times I try to shoehorn it in, it's still about a different idiot. This video is about a man who is able to save the world through beauty, finding its truth in reality. That man is named Kenji. By the time we see Kenji in the third part of the manga, the world is thrown into chaos. Friend is nearing the final stages of the new prophecies, and the other protagonists feel more or less helpless to stop them. That is, until Kenji arrives. He is first seen in the third part liberating folks out of one of the many new fiefdoms in Friend's Japan. That's a whole nother... just read it. Introducing himself as Yakube Joe from Tomorrow Joe, a character who also vanished from the world, only to re-emerge when the world needed him. The liberation he performs is an act of non-violence, and it sweeps throughout the country and the world. To counter everything that Friend has built his empire on, he had to act counter to how Friend acted. The only way to effect change in which someone abused complex systems of power is using something that is so simple that it affects the hearts and minds of those who need to hear it. Proving once again with his guitar that he is invincible. Quite literally invincible. He gets fucking shot and still lives. How the fuck did he do that? His guitar becomes his gun, and he aims it out at the world, professing his ideology of peace, love, and all those hippie musings that he found himself growing up with in the 60s. These ideas came together to affect the masses in a song that was leaked on the airwaves, which is called Bob Lennon, which he fires away at the world around him. Emboldened by a song, a pure belief, and a crowd of people surrounding him that share in his optimism, he stops Friend from destroying the Earth. He stops him with the help of everyone who believes in him and believes in that optimism. With that, Friend has been destroyed by hippie powers. Yes, I just referenced Car Seat Headrest. Yes, I will take my soy latte to go. Fuck you. However, when the moment strikes for him to cement the fact that evil is vanquished, that he is the one who did it, he refuses the call to sing that song. The one that spread like wildfire among the masses, Bob Lennon. Something that everyone sang with how simplistic its melodies were, and with its repetitive, earwormy chorus and relatable lyrics, everyone loved the song. Instead, he chose to play with his old band and played some of the songs they shared in their heyday. A bizarre choice for a man who is posed to be a prophet, a free leader who would save the world from tyranny. So why did he refuse? The answer, my dear friends, who are neither dear nor friends, lie in the song's title, which matches the names of two prominent 60s rock legends together, Bob Dylan and John Lennon. For this video, I'm just gonna focus on Bob Dylan, since that fits the image that Kenji is trying to go for with this act. Now, to try and abbreviate this detour I could take, I'll skim the lengthy history of Bob Dylan and his music to get to the point in which it becomes relevant to the story. Lord knows I could go down that rabbit hole for hours and talk about how that recent biopic gets the story half right, or how Desire is my favorite Bob Dylan album, or his hilarious contributions to We Are the World. Actually, fuck, now that I'm saying all this, I do want to touch on A Complete Unknown, at least because I want to show how it relates to this and how it only gets the identity crisis half right. See, Bob Dylan had a problem. In 1965, he got his generational rise to fame, speaking to people with his folksy, politically poignant songwriting that was equal parts riveting and engaging, led to a superstar, following in the footsteps of American folk legends like Woody Guthrie and Pete Seeger. However, Dylan saw himself more than that, more than just a star of the moment. He found that image suffocating. So, at the 1965 Newport Folk Festival, he changed his sound entirely. Dylan went electric, which everyone who witnessed this proceeded to fucking hate, jeering him as he started a radical transformation, even more radical than what he was associated with at the time. Now, looking at his body of work he produced with that change, it is considered some of the best music ever written. Dylan made many such moves throughout his career. He did not want to be pigeonholed into one specific identity. He continued his metamorphosis decades into his career. So what bugs me is the fixation a complete unknown has on this shift in identity. It focuses on the human cost of it and frames Dylan as a man who never truly held an identity. That is not true at all. Dylan just chose to swap one identity for another. With all that being said, at the end of the day, he is still Bob Dylan, just another version of himself. He was able to find an identity and see it through until he no longer wanted to be confined by it, something he could accept. Like Dylan, our protagonist Kenji did not want to be locked into place. He didn't want to lock others into place, which is what Friend tried to do. He did not want to be the Kenji he was in his rock band days originally, or the folk hero who became a leader and swept through Japan, armed with only a guitar to make him invincible. He wanted to be the Kenji that was true to the current version of Kenji. This is why I've been trying to tie in the idiot's protagonist, Prince Mishkin, as a perfect parallel to Kenji. He is a man who pursues a passion to the bitter end, but cannot understand the real means in which he can bring it to fruition. So, the reality he wants will forever be out of reach, meaning that Kenji is able to find the possible in the things that are deemed impossible. What makes them different is Kenji is able to change his idea of what beauty is for it to be true, and for it to be real. Kenji knows that the folk image that people sought out would only lead to people acting the same way they did towards Friend. So, in the act of discarding his song, he is able to convey the message that he was hoping for. The message that believes in the individual image. The kind of image that isn't tied to some toxic idea of what other people imagine you as. The message is what I think lies in the heart of 20th century boys. One I feel I often forget in my everyday life. That the life you live is yours. You, of course, need to be there for the people around you, but you don't need to fold your worth into the shape they want it to be. It's yours, isn't it? That's something I think Kenji, we meet at the beginning of the manga, forgot. He was so busy trying to be responsible and do the right things, so much so that he forgot what he himself wanted to do. Finally, after all these years, he was able to do the right things and bring them to the world. He was able to save the world and be a rock star, and he did it on his own terms. The stuck version of himself, the one bogged down by the responsibility, too, has been destroyed by hippie powers. Yeah, I had to bring that up again. I think about it sometimes. I question whether the life I have lived up until this point was something I wanted. I know it's impossible to act like your life is good when you're living for oneself entirely, though. Sometimes you do need to act in the greater good of others around you. And yes, that means the actual greater good of people around you, not whatever you think is an act of service that is needed. You need to act not for what people want, but what they need in a way. Finding the possible things that lie behind the miracles they want. Which brings me to another point that I think I only briefly touched on with Sadikiyo that returns in the conclusion of the series, coming in the form of the 2-volume continuation, 21st Century Boys. Does Kenji fully understand his past? And can he move on from it? Can he make it right? When Kenji confronts Friend shouts that he is an evil emperor. A bewildering thing to come from the antagonist of this series, especially one who has done such things as commit multiple terrorist acts, develop an idol-worshipping cult around themselves, and start germ warfare on a global scale. It's utterly bizarre, is it not? This sticks to Kenji, and is part of the reason he decides not to play Bob Lennon, opting to only perform it in front of Second Friend, trying to give peace to someone who needed it most. But Kenji is left wondering about the degree of truth that lies in Friend's statement, pondering if somewhere in Kenji's life he struck the new friend with a villainous act. It makes it hard for him to know that he's fully reckoned with the past. Did he somehow also scare this person into being friend? This person who was an imitation of an imitation. Through the Friendland machine, Kenji is able to go back in time through the memories that Friend left, to understand why Second Friend was so adamant about Kenji being evil, in which he finds out that their main interaction was an indirect one, spawning from an incident in which Kenji had stolen something from a candy shop, something that Second Friend would get blamed for and would go on to resent him for. While this isn't the greatest reasoning, it does make us understand his perspective a little bit better. He resented it for years, and even went as far as becoming a copy of a benevolent cult leader to get revenge on Kenji and the world at large. A world he would go on to resent for allowing such bad things to happen to him. Look, I know this is strange reasoning for someone to hate someone, but it makes sense. It could be worse. It could be worse. It's not like the manga for Oldboy, where the whole reason the main character is imprisoned for decades of his life is that the guy, when they were younger, when they were in like fucking elementary school, cried while he sang. I'm not even joking about that. No, his response is at least trying to be proportional to how a villain's motivation should be set up. Especially with the context of 20th century boys dealing a lot with childhood memories and the impact they have on adulthood. Thematically, it fits, but it can feel a little weird to say out loud. However, at this point, Kenji comes to understand that these actions he has taken, however small, cause a massive ripple. A ripple that dramatically changed someone's life. In the end, he tries to rectify things with Second Friend using the Friendland machine. It's the only thing he can do, taking accountability for his crimes, as petty as they may seem in the grand scheme of things. Just like Sadikiyo did in his rebellion against Friend. He tries to do the same thing. He knows that these decisions have an impact and can shape someone's impression of them and of people in general for life. So he tries to make the best of it, righting his wrongs while he can. In real life, that's all we can do after a mistake. That's all we can do with mistakes. Do your best while we can, live for ourselves, and continue to help others around you. If you can do that, then you might just be able to save the world and look cool while doing it. I know I'm getting a little sappy here, but I feel like this whole analysis has fallen in a very sappy direction, but damn it, it's my overly pretentious video essay. I get to do what I want with it. If I want to do random tangents about 60s folk music, I can do it. And you know what? I can make it work. Want to know how it's working? You're still watching the video, aren't you? There's your proof right there, buddy. What do you guys think of this video? Is it too long-winded? I read a lot of manga, but I thought, fuck it. This one deserves a long-ass deep dive. To be honest, this one has stuck with me a lot since I read it last year. Maybe it's just because I found it at the right time in my life, but it got me thinking about these things and how they relate to me currently, especially while I'm going through a quarter-life crisis. If you want me to review more manga, let me know in the comments below. I'm always open to reading some manga, and I don't mind talking about it. I don't need to do this extensive intellectualizing like I tried to here. I'm still gonna try it, but I don't need to do it. Shit, I don't mind talking about another series. I wouldn't mind talking about like Monster or something else, or any other Naoki Urasawa work. It doesn't have to be something serious from him either. It could be something as laid back as Happy or Yawara. Sports manga just gets my blood boiling for some reason. Or I could just talk about something else entirely. If there's anything else I consume more than movies or music, it's manga. It's fucking manga. I should see you guys in the next video, whatever that is. Anyways, my Radiohead fajitas have been sizzling for a long time now, so I should probably eat them before they get burnt. Bye! Oh yeah, I almost forgot to add this. Fuck Crunchyroll. Yeah. Now the video's gonna end.